about life after death, experiences, and challenges from India.
Good morning, respected chairperson and the August gathering. It's a proud honor and privilege for me to make this presentation in front of you. I mean, the neurosurgeons in this field are very rare. I just heard Chameno's presentation. I know Takashi out here. So we are very handful of people. But I believe neurosurgeons do have a potential to contribute to this process of organ donation pool in each and every country. Today happens to be a very special day for my country. Today happens to be the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, who is the father of nation, and also our second Prime Minister of our country, Lal Bahadur Shastri, a man who talked about no corruption and loyalty to India. So, and I would like to dedicate my talk to these two young kids, 6-year-old and 16-month-old child, who actually donated their organs, and in this year only, few months back, and they have been role models to bring a momentous change in the organ donation practice happening in our country. They have set up example in our country to old people, to young people, to rich and poor, that if we can donate our organs, why can't you donate our organs? So my talk is dedicated to these two children and our Mahatma Gandhi and Lal Bahadur Shastri. This is what India is. I think your Prime Minister has changed, but we are always close to Italy in terms of friendship. We have only one game. I mean, we play many games, but India is popularly known as for cricket, which is like a religion in our country. We are just 1.39 billion in population, second next to China. And we are the oldest civilization in the world. We do have 22 languages and many dialects, like what you have in European nations also. This is my hospital, which is 3,200 bedded Apex Institute of the country, and it was started by an Act of Parliament in way back in 1956. Well, if you talk about organ donation concept, it's actually in our historical books. When we were born and we grew up, we read about organ donation in our mythological books. We know about the picture on the top left. You see, where's the pointer? This one, that one. Yeah. So that's Lord Ganesha, and his head was actually transplanted by his father from an elephant. That's another person, and that's Dadichi, who donated his bones to kill the demons. And this gentleman, the king, he actually donated his flesh to save the life of a dog. I mean, we know about the diagnosis of death has evolved over centuries, and there is a lot of contribution by the religious leaders in all parts of the world. I mean, I'll just quote one quote in 2008 by Pope Benedict XVI, when he was questioned about the morality of such donations. All he did was he showed his organ donor card, and I think it speaks for volumes. There has been a lot of effect of COVID pandemic on organ donation rates all over the world. And in my country, where the donation rates were already very poor, they dropped down to almost non-existent level in the COVID period. We are actually, most of the nations in the world, I would say, they begin together in the organ donation drives. Almost, I would say, 1990s onwards, they all begin together, including Spain. But many nations like Spain and most of the Europe, including Italy, they have actually set up examples in front of the world in leading the organ donation campaigns. And somehow we are just still in the crawling stage, and we are gradually building up. The two nations I want to talk about is China and Iran. They began just in 2010 in the organ donation, and now China is, in terms of the number, is the leader in the world. I mean, the number of donors which come from China. There were a lot of questions raised on the integrity of the donations, about donation from the prisoners, which were actually stopped in 2015. And we don't know much what is happening, but what we have understood is they are doing reasonably very well. From Iran, again, the donations have really picked up very well. I believe when I look at these two nations, it's not the religion which actually is a major deterrent to organ donation. It's the religion with the education which is a major deterrent to the organ donation restriction in some countries, including my country. So from here I'll take my talk. As Escalante just mentioned, yes, we have a law existing since 1994 and it's mandatory by law to declare, certify and to ask for an organ donation. However, despite the law, the ground reality is completely different and it's not happening. In my country, the problems are unique and the management has to be tailor-made. Most of the patients in most of the centers are admitted under neurosurgeons. We have one death every 3 minutes occurring from road traffic accident and from head injury in our country. So we have a very large donor pool whom we can contribute. Almost 200,000 patients they die from the catastrophic brain injury. And I think the role of a neurosurgeon is extremely important when you talk about in the context of India. In my country, the diagnosis of brain death is purely clinical. We don't rely on any test whatsoever. The apnea test, 2 apnea tests, 6 hours apart need to be done. We don't do EEG because we have a definition of brainstem death, not the whole brain death in our country as per the law. 4 doctors are needed to certify and we obtain consent from 2 near relatives. We don't take donations from unknown patients or if there is no consent from the family. Then see a few things like Lazarus sign. I mean, we don't talk about it much, but these are the signs which have a very important negative influence on your organ donation campaign. What actually happens is, if you have some patient who shows this sign in your ICU, and if you're ignorant about it, then the message goes like anything. In a country where the organ donation rate is already very low, and if some negative publicity goes by the media, oh, this person was alive, he was moving his hands like that, and then declared dead, it's a big negative thing. So I think we as clinicians, surgeons and intensivists, we should be very clear in what we are declaring. As Escalante rightly mentioned, what we have done is we have started a WhatsApp group for our residents, and it is mandatory for my residents to send me every 12 hourly updates on any M1 patient admitted in my hospital. And it has completely changed the picture in my setup, and we are identifying each and every patient of catastrophic brain injury getting admitted. So it has been made compulsory in my center, and that's how we have made the change. Second thing is about the apnea test. Well, it looks very simple, but it is like doing a surgery. You know, when you read about something, it may look simple, but when you actually operate or clip an aneurysm or do some skull base, then you understand the things are very different. So there are lots of ifs and buts and troubleshooting of apnea test. Somebody who does apnea test just once or 2 or maybe 5 times in his 1 year or his career, you don't expect him to do it perfectly and correctly. So we have to learn the troubleshooting and how to do an apnea test, and I hope the Spanish people, they come out with guidelines on the exact way and discuss out various scenarios, the difficult scenarios wherein anybody can stuck. Let's say if you have a very low PaCO2, how do you handle? If you have very high PaCO2, how do you handle? What if the patient worsens intermittently? It's also not very clear whether you should obtain consent prior to the apnea test. Some nations take it, some don't take it. And it's very debatable. In our country, we don't take it as of now. Again, about ventilator auto-cycling or the rebreathing of the ventilator, many people, including myself, a year back, I was not aware about this entity. And we were losing many patients who were actually brain dead, but they were being prolonged because there was some breaths shown on the ventilator, which was actually a problem with the ventilator. And if we just do some troubleshooting, we can actually identify those patients. So one has to know the ventilatory issues very well when you are doing with the brain death certification. In children, again, it's very debatable, and one needs to know the pathophysiology and how to declare and diagnose a child with a brain death. There are a lot of things happening. Like for example, this child who had a compound head injury, the neurosurgeon in charge of the case, oh, this child is having a compound head injury, brain matter is coming out, he's having meningitis, so unfit for organ donation. No, you can actually consider and we converted this child for organ donation. What about ancillary test? Well, in my law, there are no guidelines as of now regarding uses of ancillary tests, and people actually they don't do it. I mean, in case we are not sure about the apnea test, what we say is, okay, fine, let him just pass. We just give up on that patient. But now we have made it mandatory. We don't miss even a single patient. In 22 nations in the world, ancillary test has been made mandatory, and we do CT angiogram in our group of patients. Like this patient who had a cyanotic congenital heart disease, we could not do the apnea test, and so we went ahead with the CT angiogram, which we found to be very useful, and it can be now done bedside also with the latest mobile CT scanners which are available with you. Then people don't talk about the issue of septicemia. Hundreds and hundreds of patients you will get in your ICU who will have high procalcitonin, high TNC counts, but negative blood cultures. And when the transplant team comes, they say, oh, the procal is high, unfit for donation. Why? I mean, it's not a contraindication for organ donation. Septicemia or negative viral markers is an absolute contraindication. We also used to struggle with getting the blood culture report, which usually takes 48 hours. But now we do biofire assays, wherein within 2 to 4 hours, you can actually know if the bacteria is grown in the culture or not. And in organ donation patients, you cannot wait for very long. So we have actually changed everything so that we can have maximum conversions from the patients that we have. This is how a valid consent is must in my country. For the minors and the unmarried, consent of both parents is must. In the married cases, consent of spouse is must. And people who have actually pledged their organs, consent from the near relative is needed, and it is must in India. So it's actually an opt-in consent system which we have. And I believe maybe if we shift for either to the soft consent system of Spain or to the opt-out, it may bring some change in the numbers. We have a unique population of migratory people, those who come from the other cities to settle down and to look for a better job opportunities. And it's very difficult to obtain consent when the husband dies in another city and the wife lives in another city. So we have started taking consent on the WhatsApp. We send them the forms, they sign it, and through a video conference we obtain consent and we record it in our system. The second hurdle which I noted was, I mean, it's a very unique thing which we have in our country. I call it second postmortem. All head injury patients are medical legal cases, and forensic postmortem is a must for insurance claims and everything. Now what used to happen was, patient used to have an organ retrieval. After that, their body was packed and it was sent again to the forensic medicine. Again a body was opened up, the head was opened up, and then again it was closed by a technical person. So my objection was, why the hell are we doing it? Why can't we do vitropsy, CT scan of the cadaver? This is what we were doing in the COVID times. And so I could bring out this change in my country, and yesterday we had one organ donation from the most important person of the hospital, additional director of AIIMS, who believed in the concept and he donated his sister. And yesterday was the first time in my country wherein we actually did the vitropsy, and the postmortem was done at the time of organ retrieval itself. So there's so many issues which are not talked about, but they are being carried out for months and years and centuries altogether. And we, I think, after interacting with the people in other parts of the world, we need to learn and make the changes. Breaking patterns. It's a special concept altogether. No matter how much I struggle to identify the patients, keep the organs healthy, it goes a total waste if I'm not able to convert that case. And you have to learn the skills. It's not just the transplant coordinators, it's we as neurosurgeons, intensivists, neurologists, we also should know how to talk to the family, how to take them into confidence. And I believe we as doctors, the caregivers, we are in a better position to convince to the family because they trust in us and we know what actually went to the patient. So I have started taking consent myself in all cases of all tests happening. It takes some time from my busy neurosurgical schedule, but then I've been able to take consent in almost all patients happening now, which never used to happen before. The role of media. You have seen some movies like Palpito or Joseph in India. These movies, they give a negative